Please have a seat.
Good morning and welcome to the Christian Life Center. My name is Cecilia. Thank you for choosing to worship with us this morning. If you're new here, please take a look at the inside cover of your bulletin. Here you'll see our next steps page where there are 2 simple steps to take if you'd like to get to know us more. We think this is a pretty great place to connect with others, and we hope you'll take the time to check out how you can make that happen. If you'd like to speak with someone today, stop by our info center out in the lobby and someone there would be happy to connect with you. Our goal at the Christian Life Center is to make it simple for you to connect to Jesus and to one another. Here are some ways we hope will make that easier. CLC currently has 5 mission partners that we support in significant ways with our time, talents, and treasure. The feature organization for February is Urban Promise Wilmington, a multifaceted ministry that works with at-risk urban children and youth. Through after-school programs, summer camps, teen job training and employment, 2 alternative schools, sports and experimental learning programs, and international internships, Urban Promise pursues their vision of a community in Christ of servant leadership and transformation, seeking a full life for all involved, urban youth, families, volunteers, and staff in the neighborhoods of the city. To learn more about the organization, its impact, and how you can become involved, visit their Facebook page at Urban Promise Wilmington or go to their website at urbanpromise.org. The church's Urban Promise advocacy team invites you to consider one or more of these options in the coming months. Participate as an individual, family, or small group in the Power Up Workday on March 2nd. Attend the Urban Promise auction on March 7th. CLC will host its annual Women's Conference on Saturday, March 9th. All ladies are welcome to join us at 8:30 in the cafe area for a light breakfast and fellowship. Join us as we hear from women within our church share the testimonies of how God has worked and continues to work in their lives. Please visit our website or church app to sign up. Childcare will be available. Middle school girls in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th, you are invited to a girls' night this Friday, March 1st. This free event will run from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the CLC. Please join us for a night of pizza, games, snacks, movies, and more. Wear your favorite pajamas, and we're looking forward to a night of fellowship and fun. To get a general idea of attendance, please RSVP on the back of the bulletin if you plan to attend. Hope to see you there. For more information about upcoming events, make sure to like us on Facebook at CLC Family, visit us online at clcfamily.church, or download our app by texting CLC Family app to 77977. Thanks for worshiping with us today.
Good morning. Glad to see you all. A couple of things. You just saw an ominous video. That's exciting. And here's what's going on there, just so you're aware. We kind of, when we teach here, if you're new, this would be good information for you. If you've been here a while, good review. We teach in what we call a series. That just means kind of the big topics we're covering take more than 1 week, and sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. This topic has actually taken us 13 weeks, and kind of what we're covering, and still got 5 more weeks after this week, and then we'll get ready for Easter, so lots of fun there, is this idea of kind of the role that the church plays in this world. And so as we've been working through this series, there's kind of been this conviction that has led us to go through this each week, and I just want to let you in on the agenda that we've had. I haven't really talked about it in this way, but now that we're 7 weeks in, it makes sense that I share this with you. There's this conviction that I have, our church has, I think the Bible leads us to. When we see the brokenness in our world, whether that's evil, whether that's complications of politics, whether that's about health care or foster care or adoption or poverty or trafficking, whatever those things are, whenever we hear those stories, one camp of the church kind of goes, see how bad this world is. It's so terrible. Shame on you, world, right? There's that camp, and it's true, the world is broken. But I would say that's not the camp that our church lives in. In fact, the camp that I live in personally, and I think our church lives in, is almost, when I see those things, I'm actually really sad. Not just really sad that those things are happening in our world. I'm sad because I think the solution to all those things, poverty, orphans, widows, trafficking, healthcare, all those issues we see in the world and go, they're so terrible, shame on you, world. I look at them and I go, I actually think God's solution for all those things is the church. Amen. So when I see those things in the world and I hear about just the despair that our world's living in, I actually go, man, church, we should do something about this. And so for the last 7 weeks, and we'll continue working through that, we're kind of opening up God's Bible and going, okay, God, what is it you want the church to do? Which is why we've talked about orphan care and adoption and foster care. And in fact, if some of you were ready to jump in on that, I think you should still. And some of you are still kind of praying through it. Let me just tell you what next steps are there. If you're going, hey, I do think the church should be more involved in caring for little kiddos. One of the things that we talked about a few weeks back is going, we can't just be pro-birth, right? We got to be pro-life. We got to go, man, that minute that baby shows up in this world, the minute that happens, we have to be ready to support families, ready to care for them, all those kind of things. And we got to journey with them even when they're teenagers and not as fun, right? Or even when they become adults and you would classify them as lazy or don't have a good work ethic and all of a sudden they're poor and can't take care of themselves. We can't go, they're little babies we take care of, but everybody else, oh well. And so as we kind of think about how our church responds to those things, one of the things is going, well, let's actually love these mamas who get this really overwhelming news about being pregnant. And when they are faced with this horrific decision of, do I terminate that life, which is what it is, or do I walk in the pain and the sorrow of this world that I have to do all this on my own without any income? Who takes care of the child? I'm never going to go to school. Whatever those things are, we go, hey, as a church, we have to support and rally around all sides of this and love people and care for them. And many of you go, yep, I agree, would like to be a part of that. And here's your next step there. This Wednesday night at 6:15, we will meet, actually right out in that lobby, we will meet and discuss kind of the next steps as a church for how we do. We're going to participate in foster care and adoption, so you'll hear from folks who have some experience working with the state, and then also hear kind of what we're going to plan on doing with all that. So just would invite you to do that. Now, one of the things that we're also wrestling through as a church is, okay, where does the church fit into our education system? How do we partner with the government in doing education? How do we help raise up families, support families? And just say next Wednesday night, that's not this Wednesday night, but next Wednesday night, we're going to have kind of a Q&A and some preliminary discussions of what it would look like for a church to get back in the middle with education. So if you're not familiar, in 1743, New London Presbyterian Church, that's this church, started the New London Academy through Francis Allison. Skip ahead several hundred years, that same school that started within our church moves from New London to Newark, and then becomes University of Delaware. So our church actually founded the University of Delaware. Pretty crazy stuff. We're going, okay, is God done with us in terms of how education works, or should we be back in the middle of it? So next Wednesday night, not this Wednesday night, but next Wednesday night, we're going to start having some discussions about that. If you're interested in hearing more about that, you can just show up. I'll tell you more about that next week. But those are kind of responses of going, okay, our church really can't just sit on the sidelines or sit at the street corners with a bullhorn preaching at people and telling people that God's disappointed in their behavior. We actually got to get in the middle of this and get our hands dirty and actually care for the least of these and care for people who are lost and love them regardless of whether or not we feel like they agree with us, or regardless of whether or not we feel taken advantage of, or regardless of whether or not we feel appreciated in the process. And so that's kind of just a response of going, let's open up God's Word and figure out what He says. And so if you're new here, what we've been doing is we've been looking at these letters in the Bible. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, it's actually written by 30-plus authors over about 1,600 years. And kind of the idea is it's split up in Old Testament, New Testament. Old Testament, basically big thesis is we're in trouble. That's what the big thesis of the Old Testament is. We're in trouble. And if we were to stop and look at our world now, we'd say the same thing. We go, wow, our world is in trouble. That's not a new thing. But the whole thesis of the Old Testament was going, we're in trouble. We can't fix ourselves. There is something greater and more mess than we actually even realize. And we're just now scratching the surface on evil and brokenness. And when we look out in the world, we go, it's really broken. And the part of the Old Testament actually gave us all these laws to try to figure out, not to just look out in the world and figure out it's broken, but to look inward into our own hearts and our own souls and go, oh man, we're in trouble too. So one of the neat things about the church, and if you're new to the church, this would be really good for you to know, is that the reality of those of us who have come to the conclusion that Jesus is our Savior, we sing about him, we'll hear more about him in a second. The reason for that is we have first come to the conclusion that we're in trouble. Not we as in like the collective sense of all of us, but we as an individuals, that I am in trouble. So the whole Old Testament was helping us come to the conclusion that I am in trouble, that I can't fix me, that there's something greater going on, that the very things I even try to do, I can't do, and there is a problem. So the whole Old Testament goes, there is a problem, and there seems to be no way out of this problem. But the big crescendo of the Old Testament is, but where there seems to be no way, Jesus is going to show up and make a way. So the whole Old Testament is going, there is a problem, and you need a fixer, you need a reconciler, you need someone to save the day. And all throughout the Old Testament, every single book points to this hero that's going to come. His name is Jesus. So the whole Old Testament goes, there's a problem, we need fixed, and the only one who can fix us is Jesus. So then the New Testament, which was written, 2,000 years ago, starts with the story of the fixer, of the reconciler, of the Savior, of the Messiah. Those are terms we use to discuss him. And the whole New Testament basically declares that Jesus is God, shows up, and makes a way where there seemed to be no way. And he literally dies for us. He pays the price for our sin and dies for us. And as Christians, we're certain to understand that. As not a Christian, the minute you hear that, you go, see, that's just so weird. Some guy nailed to a cross, dying for sins. Don't even get that. Why in the world would somebody have to die for my sins? So you got that whole piece going on, and it just seems like this myth or folklore or legend. And so that would be the declaration of the first 4 books of the New Testament, these kind of biographies about who Jesus is. One of the nice things is, even though it seems a little bit like mythology, this is where history comes in and captures the other side of the story that we also get in the Bible, and kind of gives us some color to it. And this guy who declared that he was hero and savior, he actually gets murdered for saying he's God, right? But what's really crazy in that story is he literally gets put in the ground. This is history. History will capture this. And then he defeats death and comes back to life. So he goes, you can trust me. Where there was no way, I made a way. He saved the day. And then he invites us to follow him. And all these people said, he actually died. And then he came back to life, and that's never happened in the history of the world. And so if someone can do that, he's probably worth following. And so all these people started following him and becoming like him and declaring that he is loving and gracious. And this thing started 2,000 years ago called the church. And the church was geared around worshiping this deity, this God who died and came back to life. And the way by which they worshiped him was actually started to live like him. And the craziest thing about this guy, Jesus, is he loved people well. He sacrificed himself. He always served people. When he was the most important person in the room, which was always, he didn't lord over them and scream at them. He got on his hands and knees and he washed people's feet. And so this first century church goes, if that's the way to live, then we'll model that, and let's love the world that way. And so this big movement happens, and these were other folks within kind of outside hated the movement, didn't understand it, and wanted their control and their power, so they continued to persecute or punish these Christians. In fact, there was an emperor at the time, his name was Nero, and he hated Christians because he liked to be worshipped himself. And these guys would go, no, Jesus is Lord. And Nero would go, no. You're supposed to be impressed with me. I'm the one who protects you. I'm the one who provides for you. And so this emperor literally would capture Christians, and he would do whatever he could to punish them. He would murder them. And some of the things that he started to do in the 20, 30, 40 years after Jesus is gone, that he started to take these Christians and he would literally put them on stakes. He put a stake through them, and they would be alive, and he would light them on fire. And as people would walk into his big palace parties, they'd literally be walking through these people on pillars who were in agony, dying, as they were walking to this place. Like Nero going, yeah, if you want to follow that Jesus, then this is what's going to happen to you. And what's crazy is even though that was going on, more and more people started chasing after Jesus. And so there's this weird, crazy thing going on that the church was exploding and loving people really well. And there was major opposition. And all this stuff is kind of at war with each other, and yet these churches are still serving God, and these churches are still loving people. And one of the things that kind of started to show up was this idea of self-preservation, which is what we worship, right? We don't want all the stuff. We just want to be comfortable, meaning we just want to take care of ourselves, not to depend on anyone else. And this self-preservation started to invade the church, where they were so overwhelmed by the stuff going on and the way that people were treated, they started trying to just protect themselves. And this motif or this theme started happening, and it's still going on 2,000 years later, where the people within our world came up with a better reason to live, which is such a sad one, and their goal became to just arrive safely at death. Meaning, how do I have a comfortable life? How do I live it as long as I can? And then at the end, how do I just kind of die in a safe and comfortable way? And so you got these two things at odds. You got this movement that's going on and all these people whose preservation was at stake. And so these two things were at play within the church. And so when the church started saying we have to stand up and care for other people who don't care for themselves and love them well and serve them, what they realized is that sacrifice was standing at odds with their desire to be comfortable and have self-preservation. So all this stuff is going on, and while this stuff is going on, these church leaders kept continuing to remind people that Jesus is still Lord and that there still is a plan and he still provides and that there still is a hope and a future, and it's the church serving other people. And so these different church leaders would write these letters back to the church to kind of remind them of these things. And so for the last 7 weeks, we've been working through some of these letters, and we've been kind of landed for the last few weeks on a very particular author whose name is Paul. Now, Paul was Saul, so he had a name change, and the reason he changed his name was actually because he had a massive life transformation. So Saul had everything: rich, wealthy, educated, had power, authority, and he lived in that religious realm that didn't like Christians either, and he started persecuting them. Now, on this particular day, as Saul is going to a new town to start ruining more Christians, he has this supernatural experience. Now, to be honest with you, I'm a pastor. I'm standing here talking to you. I've never had this kind of experience, so this isn't how you meet Jesus. But Saul, for him personally, he had this moment where Jesus, post-death, resurrection, literally stands before him and makes a very bold statement as Paul is going to hurt other people. He goes, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he literally says that Saul, "Look, you are murdering my children, and why are you doing that?" And so there's just this big moment where Saul, who is filled with anger and bitterness, comes face to face with Jesus, and everything changes for him. To the point where now Saul becomes Paul and goes from town to town and starts starting these new churches, these new movements, and going, we can serve and love, and we can actually resolve these problems in our world by serving like Jesus and being like Jesus. And as a result of doing that, Saul, who becomes Paul, continues to get persecuted, and he continues to get imprisoned for this belief. And while he's in these prisons, he's writing letters back to these churches to kind of put them back in focus on what they should be focused on, right? And so we're going to look at this letter today. It's the letter is called Colossians, because Saul, who becomes Paul, is writing this letter about 60 AD, so almost 2,000 years ago, reminding the church what its focus should be. Now, what's interesting about this letter that we're going to look at, really, really important here, is that it actually helps clarify everything about the Christian faith. So this whole letter that we're going to look at is all specifically talking about Jesus and what Jesus does and who Jesus is. So one of the things that Paul is going to help us understand here, really important, if you're not a Christian, really want you to understand this, is he's going to distinguish this religion, this worldview, as uniquely different and distinctly different from every other worldview that's out there. You see, every other religion tells you what you should do to make God happy with you, or tells you what you should do to make yourself happy with you because you're really your own God. So here's what religion is in its simplest form. Religion is man's attempt either to reconcile himself to God, get back to God, or become his own God. So every religion out there, in some way, is either focused on you making God happy with you, or you making yourself happy with you because you don't believe there's a God. So that sounds really reductionistic, but every single religion, even if you're like, I'm not religious, going, yeah, see, you just go, there's no God, so my only goal is to find my own pleasure, my own joy, and do my own things. And yeah, I'm going to do some nice things. I'm going to do some philanthropy because it makes me feel better about me. And so religion is just our attempt to either make God happy with us, or make ourselves happy with us. So what's unique about the Christian faith is in every other religion, all these leaders, Buddha, Muhammad, they're coming in and going, if you'll follow these sets of rules, if you'll do these things, then eventually God will be happy with you. But the work is still all based on what you do, all based on how you perform. And one of the things that was showing up in the church, I just told you about what the church should do, is the church lost focus on the one who did all the work and then started focusing on all the ways they should behave. Right? Okay, if we make the church better, if we serve people, then God will be happy with us. And Paul's going to continue to write and say, yeah, we should serve, but that's not because it will make God happy with you. It's because God is already happy with you. And so Paul's going to put front and center the way by which Christianity is uniquely different from every other religion. And what makes it different is in Christianity, you don't do any of the work to make God happy with you. Religion is man's attempt to either become their own God or get to God. Christianity is God's attempt to actually make us reconciled to him. So if you imagine all religions like this big ladder that you're trying to climb up to get to God, which is impossible. There's no ladder big enough. And Christianity is just the opposite. It's where God comes down a ladder and brings himself here. And so Paul is going to remind these Christians that all the work about the church and all the work for our worldview that reconciles us to God was all done by Jesus and not done by us. So there's all this murmuring going on about if you would just perform better, God would be happy with you. And they're like, Jesus, he was a good guy, but he wasn't really God. And so there's all these arguments going on, and Paul's going to put front and center the deity of who Jesus is. Now, if you're not a Christian, which is fair, I'm glad you're here, one of the things that we just would have to acknowledge is you believe that Jesus is somebody. Maybe you think he's a folklore, myth, or legend, but you would go, he's significant enough that people are still talking about him. He's significant enough that people are singing to him. In fact, we just sang 3 songs all about this guy, Jesus, and all to Jesus. And you have to go, okay, Jesus was at least significant enough that someone decided that time should be defined based on him, right? BC, AD, before Jesus, that was all the time in the past, and then AD in the year of our Lord. That's not, after Jesus was born. It's going, once Jesus came to be in this world, we just define every other time based on that. And you go, even if you're not a Christian, you'd at least have to acknowledge those things. So there's this neat things that happen in the scripture, and has to happen for us, where Jesus even asks the people following him to define who they think he is. So the one thing that makes Christianity so unique is it's all based on who Jesus is. So what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes is we're literally going to open up the scriptures and say, can we just make some conclusions about who you think Jesus is? So if you're a Christian, this should really firm up those things. If you're not a Christian, here's some really good information to go, this is who Paul very clearly says Jesus is. Now, one last thing I'll say before we open up Colossians is that I don't usually teach this way. Usually I got one point. I'm just not bright enough to come up with lots of points. But we're actually going to cover 10 things because this is what the scriptures bring us to. And you'll see them in your notes. I went ahead and put them there so you have to write them down. One thing I will tell you is I did flip-flop 6 and 7 on accident. You'll see more of that when we get there. So Paul is writing to this church going, let me tell you who is the most significant person to ever stand on this planet, the most significant person to worship, the one who holds all things together, and he's going to declare that is Jesus. And so he's going, everything about Christianity has to be defined about Jesus. So he's just going to explain it, and he's going to start by reminding them what Jesus did for everyone, including the Christians. And this is what he says. This is Colossians chapter 1, beginning of verse 13. It'll be up here on the screens. Here it goes. For he, that's Jesus, has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So Paul's going to say, hey, here's a reminder. There is a point where you're walking astray, where you are going to spend the rest of your eternity disconnected from God. We know that place is hell, and here's what hell is. Hell is an eternity disconnected from life. If life starts with God, ends with God, it's all about God, Paul is saying, hey, there is a time where you're walking away from God. You are not connected to God. Let's just be honest. In this room, there are some of us who are not walking with God. You don't believe God exists. You don't believe God's real. You're not even sure if he is real, whether or not you want anything to do with him. And Paul's going, for all of us, that was the case at some point in our life. Whole point of the Old Testament was to help you understand that we are walking away from God. And then Paul goes, where there was no way, God made a way, and that's Jesus. And he says what Jesus did. He came to, he brought us redemption by forgiving us of our sin. Meaning that disconnection as a result of our behavior disconnected us from God. That's called sin. And Jesus brings a bridge and brings us back to God. So if you don't believe that, that's fine. But what Paul's saying, foundationally, that's what Jesus did. And so now he's going to go, let me help you understand who Jesus is. Now, one of the things that Tim Keller says, he was the pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church, and he says, everybody has to deal with God in one of two ways, okay? If you deal with God. Either you see God as a means to an end, or you see him as the end. And I just say in Christianity, this is so important because I get this wrong all the time. Either we see him as a means to an end, right? Think about it. You have a bad week, a bad month, a bad marriage, a bad situation in your life, and what do you say? God, 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 would you please come through, right? And if you will, fill in the blank, save my marriage, get me out of debt, keep me out of bankruptcy, bring my child back, whatever it is, get me out of jail. If you will blank, then I will, right? So there's this prayer. All of us have done it. So this isn't judgment. Where you go, God, if you'll come through for me, then I'll do something. In other words, God, I see you as a means to my end. And my end is a better life, a more comfortable life, a little bit more self-preservation, a little bit more money in the bank, a little bit more influence, a reconciliation with some kind of relationship. So in those things, what Tim Keller's saying is a lot of us still see God as a means to a different end. But that end is still our own preservation and our own joy and our own happiness. Or, Tim Keller says, either we see him as a means to an end, or we see him as the end. We see him as the goal. And what Paul is going to help us see here is going, you can't see Jesus as a means to an end. And here's the reason why. If you're a Christian, you might not like this. You will spend your entire eternity celebrating Jesus. Your entire eternity will be about Jesus. And this is where it gets so confusing in Christianity. Because even at funerals, we'll talk about your aunt or your grandmother dying, and then we'll celebrate Jesus as the one who reunites you with your aunt. Hey, pray this prayer. Get your heart right. That's what they'd say in the South. So you can see grandmama again, right? Like this is the idea that Jesus came so that you can be with your relatives for all eternity. Which is true, but that's not the end. The end is that you get Jesus. And to be honest with you, here's the problem for a lot of us. That doesn't sound that fun. I mean, can we just be really honest here as Christians? That doesn't sound all that exciting. Which is kind of scary. Because you're going, do you understand that you will spend your entire eternity with this guy? Not so that you can live forever, so that you can be with him. And so Paul, who's brighter than I am, right? He's peering into the human soul, and he's actually pretty concerned going, I don't think that's what most of you want. I think most of you want a Savior who saves you for your own end, not saves you to the end, which means you get Jesus. So I just want you to hear me here. The whole goal of this message today is to convince you that that is a really good thing. Not that you get heaven, not that you get to see grandmama again, but that you get Jesus as the gift. And so Paul, much better than I am, is going to give you 10 really good reasons why he's a really good gift. So that's what he's helping us understand. And here's the first one. Here's why you should be excited about who Jesus is. And he's going, because Jesus is, here's the first one. It's going to be up on the screen. It's also going to be in your notes. He's the image of God. And this is what he says next in verse 15. The Son is the image of the invisible God. So he's going, let me tell you about who Jesus is. He is God. So that God that you're wondering if he exists, whether or not he's good, whether or not he's loving, whether or not he's even available, you go, I think that God's angry, that God's mean, and you look at the Old Testament and go, that God's the God who wiped people out in the flood. Right? And so you had these questions about how in the world would you worship God. In fact, a lot of you, if you're not a Christian, or you've heard people like Bill Maher or other cynics in the atheistic crowd who just talk about how bad God is and tell you should never trust that God because even if he is real, you would want nothing to do with him. And you go, well, I don't really know what God would be like. Well, what Paul is saying here is if you want to know who God is, all you have to do is look at Jesus. Jesus is God, is what he's saying. He is, the Son is the image of the invisible God going. If you want to see the visible God instead of the invisible one, all you have to do is look at Jesus, which changes everything. Because you go, well, God is angry and just wants to punish people. Jesus loved the least of these and served those who mocked him. Literally, while he is on a cross getting murdered, people are spitting on him and gambling for his clothes. And you know what God says in those moments? Father, forgive them. They know not what they're doing. He's not angry. He's not going, strike them down to hell. That is not God. And so if you want to see what is the picture of God, you see who Jesus is. And Jesus came to serve. The Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. Jesus' whole goal was to care for people and love people. There's this moment right before he gets arrested, and these bad guys, they're real bad. They're going to murder Jesus. They come to get him, and Peter takes out a sword, which is awesome, and he cuts off a guy's ear. You know that guy probably deserved to lose an ear, right? And in that moment, it's so crazy. This is in the Bible. Peter cuts off an ear, and Jesus is getting arrested. But he pauses for a second to pick up that ear. You know how creepy that is? Right? Is that Van Gogh? Is that what it is? He got this ear, and Jesus picks up this ear and puts it back on that guy's head and goes, "Abraca Jesus," and that thing is fixed perfectly. Right? He didn't really say "Abraca Jesus," right? But like in this moment, the invisible God is visible, and he takes time to put a man's ear on. Of all the things he needs to do in that moment, he pauses for a second. And so what Paul is saying here is, look, you got to understand why Jesus is so important is he gives you a picture of exactly who God is. Loving and gracious and kind and patient and slow to anger. So the first one is he's the invisible God. It gets better. The second one is this. He's the ruler of all creation. Here's what it says in the second part of that verse. The firstborn over all creation. So he's literally giving us this birth order deal. You get that? You understand that? And he's going, so if you want to know who God is, if you understand who God is, not only is he the image of God in Jesus, Jesus is also the ruler of all creation. Meaning, he's always been the plan. Jesus was the firstborn. Jesus was always in God's mind. Jesus was always the solution, which has got to be really helpful for us, because if you think about the weird things in the Bible, like the Ten Commandments, or a lot of us really are hung up on that piece of fruit, right? If you've heard the story, Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, and God shows up and goes, "Nana, nana, boo, boo, can't have this fruit," right? And you go, that is a ridiculous God. That is ridiculous that God would tempt them and entice them, right? Imagine me doing that to my kids, going, look at this Hershey's bar. Yum, 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 yum. Don't you get any of that, or I'll spank you, right? And you go, that's a terrible parent. So you see this story and you go, how in the world would God just dangle a piece of fruit in front of them that he didn't want them to eat? And I'd go, the reason is because it wasn't about the fruit at all. It was helping them come to the conclusion that they needed fixed. Remember, the whole Old Testament, there's just one thing. You got a problem. And the sooner you can come to that conclusion, the better off you are, right? You know the story for all addicts. The first thing about getting into sobriety is what? Admitting there is a problem. You cannot find healing. You cannot be whole until you come to the conclusion that there is a problem. So God, in his graciousness, helps humankind from the very beginning understand there's a problem. And the problem is we like our plan better than God's. So if it wasn't a piece of fruit, it could have been anything else. What God was helping people understand is they have a problem. And the problem is they want the position of God. So from the very beginning, there's always going to be a problem. The whole Old Testament points it out. You have a problem. You can't fix it. So the whole point of the fruit was actually Jesus. So when you see that fruit dangling in that tree, in the garden, you can't see a mean God. It's a loving God going, the sooner I can help you come to this conclusion, the quicker we get you to healing and wholeness in the relationship with me that you're meant to have. So from the very beginning, is what it's telling us here. The ruler of all creation. Jesus was there, and he was always the point. He was the fail-safe. It was always the point. Jesus was always the plan. It wasn't like they ate the fruit and God goes, oh no, not sure what to do now. What should we do? Oh goodness, what should we do? Let's come up with a plan. No. The plan was always that he was going to save us through his son Jesus, who always was. So the first one is he's the image of God. The second one, he's the ruler of all creation. He was the firstborn of all creation. The third one, verse 16. He is the creator of all. Meaning you go, well, how did this world get here? And what Paul's saying is the world got here through Jesus. In fact, this is what he writes. He says, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things, watch this, have been created through him, and even more importantly, for him. So Paul's saying is, if you want to understand where it all begins with Jesus. And you want to understand how the world got here, what the Bible says is God gave it permission. It says, let there be light. Not only did he create it, he actually gave it permission. You see, it says, let us make man in our own image. Who's us in that deal? That's God and Jesus. They're having a conversation. We're going, that is so beyond what I can understand. That God and Jesus, they're the same, but they're different. They always were. And I'm going, yes, that is complicated. But what isn't complicated when you think about the genesis of this world? What isn't mind-boggling? And so what Paul is saying is, from the very beginning, God was Jesus, and he created all this. And you go, oh, that's neat, but still a little weird. And then he gives us a better picture. He said created by him and for him. We talk about it a lot here. You go, if a creator created creation, you got to go why, not how. Not how. How is that, a cute thing to theorize? But you got to go why. Why were we created? And in the very beginning, we understand, and what Paul is saying here is we were created for Jesus. And you go, well, that seems really arrogant of him. No, it's very loving of him. The same reason you aren't arrogant for wanting to welcome your children into your world and be in a relationship with them. So Jesus created you for him. You are so significant. Think about it. I've just been reading. There's been 3 NFL owners in the last month who have spent over $100 million each, 180 and $250 million on yachts because they're bored. And so they're going to spend all this money, and we all think it's nonsense. We're like, it's going to take $1 million just to move that yacht 15 miles, right? And we go, really, you're that bored? And yes, they're that bored, and they want to do something with their money, so they buy these mega yachts. And all these rich people are fighting over the bigger mega yachts, right? You go, well, that's what rich people do. They don't have anything else to do with their money, so they spend it on those kind of things. Well, God, who has infinite supply, he didn't build a mega yacht. He built you. He made you to be in relationship with him, and which is always the greatest part of this apologetic or this explanation. Going, when you go, well, if that's the case, then why do I feel disconnected from him? Because we've chosen our own plan over God's, and Paul's going to help us understand how he fixes that. So the third one's creator of all. The fourth one, he's eternal. So Paul explains it long before, same thing as creator of all. He is before all things. So this guy, this God that you get to connect with, he always was. He is eternal. He's eternal. And you go, that hurts my head. And I go, yeah, try multiplying by infinity. It doesn't even make sense. But mathematicians will tell you that it's still a number out there, right? Or an idea out there. There's this eternal thing, and you go back as far as you can in the past and keep on going. You go, well, where did it all start? And it all started with Jesus. But the crazy thing is it didn't really even have a start. It always was. And Paul's going, this guy who stepped on this planet that you get for all eternity as your BFF, the one with the other half of the locket, right? That one. He is always. He is eternal. It's not just grandmama that you get in heaven. You get the creator and the being who always was. So he's eternal. He was before all things. Not only was he before all things, number 5, he's the sustainer of all. And in him, he holds all things together. So this guy, this God, Jesus, who came and stepped on this planet, not only was before all things, he is the one who holds it all together, right? He's the reason the earth revolves around the sun. He is the reason it's set up in such a perfect way that it's in the exact right position. The earth's not too close, it's not too far away, because either we burn up or we freeze to death. He holds it all. So when we go, well, how does all this work? And we get really, really overwhelmed in this world, we go, there is someone who holds it all together. He holds it all together. So Paul is writing this in prison. He's writing this in prison with people like Nero in charge. And how can he have joy? He's going, because I'm writing about the one who holds it all together. If he literally can hold the Milky Way and the whole cosmos together, I think he can keep an eye on me and what needs to happen for me in this jail cell. He's eternal. He's a sustainer of all things. That's 17b. And then starting in verse 18, here's the next one. He's the head of the church. And it says this, and he is the head of the body, the church. And, the Bible, Paul does this a lot of times. He gives us a picture of kind of the body as the picture of Jesus, or of the church. And, when he's talking about the head here, what you're really thinking about is kind of the command center. So going, he's in charge of it all. Like he is at the helm. He sustains it all, and there is not a single thing he doesn't see. And so this is the idea of God's providence, meaning he sees all things, but he is not helpless. He's actually working in all things, meaning he's holding it all together. He's guiding it. He is working in every single category. He's doing everything. And you go, well, if that's the case, then why do so many bad things happen? And there's a couple things I'll offer you real quick. One is, he won't waste any of it. That's the nice thing about God is he doesn't waste anything. We talk about this even with photosynthesis. When we breathe out carbon dioxide, some kind of plant sucks it in and kicks back out, oxygen, right? There's even when you think about the waste of animals, the manure, which I know the smell of around here, all that gets used for something, right? Yay, mushrooms, right? All that stuff gets used for something like God is a perfect steward. Even our waste is used for something, so you got that piece. But another piece to understand is, and we see it in the beginning, is while God shows up and has rule of all things, we do have the ability to walk away from him. We do have this ability to choose our own plan over God's, which is called sin, and sin does wreak havoc in this world, and it does damage. And there's even this description in the beginning where we see Satan as a serpent or a snake. And while it tells us in the very beginning that God will strike him on the head and he'll strike Jesus' heel, meaning God will save the day, but there'll still be ramifications of it. And so here's a picture I'd give you there. And Louis Giglio really helps with this in his message. He talks about David and Goliath. And here's kind of the idea that if God, Jesus is in control, he lords all things, he's won the battle. The way that you got to see it is the enemy's head's been cut off. So if it's saying Jesus is the head of the body, meaning he's all in charge, he's good, and he's cut the head of the enemy off. Now imagine this: if you got a snake, I don't even like thinking about them. They freak me out. So don't send me a text of a snake. Don't bring one by. It's not funny. You don't want to see your pastor urinate in front of you. You just don't, right? You just don't. And so please keep the snakes away. But think about it. I can imagine. I had a farm in Georgia, and there's a couple times I had to and just swat at it with one of a hoe, and then I'm talking about. You got the picture. The head gets cut off. Saying the head's off. It's dead. It's dead, right? You understand? The head gets off. It's no longer living. But is that snake still moving? Is it still flapping around? Is it still taking out whatever in its deal? I was just hearing about a story of a snake being boiled alive after the head's been cut off, and it's still coming at people out of the pot. I don't know why you eat a snake. Apparently it tastes like lobster. Eat lobster then, makes a lot more sense to me. But I'm talking about, how it's just wreaking havoc everywhere. That's the picture that I would give you in terms of this world. The enemy's head has been cut off, and it's just doing all the damage it can right this moment, but it is dead. And so what it's giving us here is Jesus is the head, meaning he's in charge. He is winning. He is in control. He is not sweating. He is not overwhelmed. He has a plan. He is the head of the church, and he is the head of the body, the church. And the second part of that, this is so good, 18b. Jesus is alive. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that everything he might have the supremacy. This is really, really profound. In fact, I would say this is the one that you got to circle and highlight. This is it. Sorry, I got those out of order in there. Number 7. I got so excited about it, I put it at number 6, right? He's alive. No, this changes everything, right? This is why you can read through the first century church and you see all, the greatest movement of the church, when so many people got involved in the church, when it blew up, and I'm talking about in terms of growth, when it exponentially grew, it was actually in the middle of this horrible persecution from people like Nero. And you go, well, how in the world did that happen? And you look at these first century leaders, all the ones who write the letters, you know what happens to all of them? They get murdered or exiled. 11 of them get murdered. Or 10 of them get murdered. The 11th gets sent to an island, right? Boiled alive. This is what happens to them. You go, well, how in the world did they do this? History captures that. And I'd go, the only solution for this, the only thing that makes sense here is that he must have come back to life. Why in the world would you devote your life and give up your self-preservation for a dead God? You know what else is interesting is all these other world religions we're talking about, you got all these different ones. Jews, they really, don't believe Jesus is God's son. They believe maybe he's a prophet, same as Muhammad. They have their other leaders, like, for example, Jews, they really like Abraham. You know what's interesting about this Abraham they celebrate? He died. And there's a place where they worship or celebrate or mourn Abraham's death. Siddhartha, you got Muhammad. All these folks, they showed up and they gave you a rule book, a playbook to do, right? But then they died. And there literally is a place, a tomb, where people still go in pilgrimage to pay the respects for the dead guy who led them to this new religion. All of them. Joseph Smith got a dead place, right? All these guys that people either worship or celebrate are the ones that say, yep, they're the ones who gave us this new religion. They all died. You know what's crazy? They all stayed dead. Now, history will show you that Jesus did something that none of those guys did, by the way. They all said there's a better way. Even Muhammad did not claim he was God, right? This guy, Jesus, he said he was God. And he got murdered for it. If you want to go, why did Jesus get murdered? The reason is he actually announced he was God, right? Which is very scary. And if anybody else were to tell you they're God, I'd say stay away from them. So it makes sense in the first century. They were very skeptical of a guy who said he was God. until that guy gets put into the ground and then comes back to life, right? Can you go to Jesus's, burial site and mourn his death? No, there's kind of this place in the Middle East we go, this may have been Joseph of Arimathea's grave, and we can celebrate that it's empty, right? There is no place of mourning. You drive by roads all the time on these curvy, dangerous roads, and you see little crosses on the side. Why are they there? Because there is a memory of someone's life that died. Too short, too soon, too tragic. Right? And you look at every other worldview out there, there was a place where the leader of that worldview was buried. They died and they stayed in the ground. What Paul is saying here is he is the beginning and he's the firstborn not only of creation, but among the dead, meaning he came back to life. The reason he's worshipped is because he proved he was God and he defeated death. And all of us are interested in that, right? Amen. You eat those kale chips. I don't understand it. You understand, those aren't real chips, right? No matter how much you tell me. Those taste like, no, they don't. They don't taste like real chips, right? You eat them. Why do you eat them? The same reason you put on SPF 150, right? Because you want to live as long as you possibly can, right? You want to have a good life. You want to be healthy. You put on your seatbelts, most of you. Why do you do that? Not because you're afraid of the ticket. Maybe there's some of that. But why do you do it for your kiddos? You strap them in like 17-point harnesses, right? And then put sunscreen on them and kale chips in their mouth. What you do? Everybody. All these vitamins, these one-a-day pills. You know what that means? One day you will die with sunscreen all over your body, kale chips all in your belly, right? Vitamins, seatbelt on. I don't really know, but guess what? No matter what you do and all those things, you will still die. You'll still die. We're even laughing about it. No one want to talk about it, but we all die. So this is so significant. The only time in human history where someone died and brought themselves back to life. He is alive, as Paul is saying. Look, I'm in prison. It's okay. The church is still going to happen because he's the head of the body. He's in charge. He is moving. He is working. And here's why you can count on it always happening. Because he was dead and he came back to life. Everything about this hinges on that, the resurrection. And then what Jesus says is, that same power that I used to conquer the grave, it's now available to the entire church. So when you look at this world and you go, we can't fix poverty. Jesus fixed death. Poverty has the little less than sign next to death, right? We look at the amount of orphans in our world and we go, one in three Christian families in America, if they jump on this train, no more orphanage problem in the world. If just the church in America would tithe 10%, this isn't a sermon on money. No more poverty in the entire world. So we go, Jesus is alive, and whatever our ailment is, whatever our problem is, it's less than death. And Jesus came back to life. And so Paul's going, look, whatever it is you got to know, what you got to know about Jesus is he is alive. He's alive. He's alive. It means others get to be alive too. It means others get to be resurrected. I think about it all the time and see it some here. And what I love about our church is there's a lot of gray hairs in here and a lot of bald heads too. And really grateful for that. Love, and I mean this with all sincerity, love the Canes, love the Walkers, love the whole deal. And just going, I love that our church covers those things. And I'll think about it. I really will. I'll see someone walk in that, and I will be so excited because I love them, and I know their story. And there will be one day where that walker, that cane, that wheelchair, it'll be thrown in the ditch, and they will be fully alive for all eternity with Jesus. And Paul is going, there is a resurrection body coming for everyone. So he's going, this is not just about Jesus being alive. It's about what he offers to everyone, and it is good, and it is perfect, and that's what's available. And here's how we know it. This is the number 8. Jesus is fully God. And it says this, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, meaning Jesus is God. And he came on this planet, and he was fully God, meaning he was completely in charge, and God was dwelt in him. And he showed up, and he made sure everybody knew they were loved and cared for. And he paused long enough to fix them the ear. He paused to welcome little kiddos and love them. And he saw their hearts, and he shepherded them. And while he did all that, he was fully God. He was fully God. And he was killed for that. He claimed to be God. Nobody else did that. And that was why he was murdered. And then verse number 20, here's what it says. He's the fixer. Reconcile is probably the word, but I think we like the word fixer. We think even about the messiness in our government. People hire their attorneys to fix the problems that they don't want to deal with. It's all done in the dark, but Jesus literally is the real fixer. Here's what it says. And through him, so God dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So it's going. And here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing about Jesus. This is what you got to come to grips with. Where there was no way, God made a way, and he made it through Jesus. So you go, you know that part of you, let's just be really honest here, that part of you, that part that when you lay down, it either laughs or cries, that part that you can't escape. Sometimes you hate it because you don't like your thoughts, right? You would even agree at times you're your own worse than me. That part of you, that no matter where you are, that part of you goes with you. That soul, that part of you that just exists everywhere, that will never end. That will never end. Will never end. Doesn't matter if you put a gun to your head, put a bottle of pills in your stomach. That part of you will never end. And when you think about this, even when you interact with people at the end of their life, they would go, treasure it, soak it up, because this will all, it'll just go by so fast. Every single time. Every time we eat a meal and our kids are acting crazy, somebody wants to stop and say, your family's so cute, enjoy it, because they're gonna be out of the house one day. And I'm like, Julie and I are high-fiving each other, like, yes, you hear that? You're going. Yes. Yes. You know, I'm just joking. I want them there always. Right? But everybody says that, like, you know it. You think about 20 years like it was yesterday, but you think about tomorrow like it's an eternity away, right? The days are long, the years are so short. And you go, well, why is that? Why is it that it seems that way? And I'm going, because that soul, that part of you can't escape, that part you will never escape, it was made to live forever. It knows no birth to death timeline. 80 years is nothing for a soul that was made to be eternal. Right? And so Jesus reconciles that back to God. So remember, he says he created all things by him and for him. He wanted to be in a relationship with you, and he wanted it so bad, he did everything he could to make that available to you. So the craziest thing about this worldview is that Jesus does all the work. He is the fixer. He continues and says, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. Old Testament. You can't fix yourself. All that your own behavior does is lead you to death. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So this is the craziest thing about this worldview, and this is what you got to decide about what you think about Jesus. Every other worldview tells you that you better behave well, and if you do things right, eventually you might get close to God and he might become okay with you. Or you can just become okay with yourself and then die, go to your nirvana, whatever it is next, right? But every single one of those categories require you to perform. Can we just be honest for a second? That's got to scare all of us. Because deep down, I'll just tell you what I know about you, because I know it about me. And look, I've sat across the couch from a lot of you. The reality is none of us are good enough to fix ourselves. That is the craziest thing about this, and this is what I love about the church, and I want us to put this front and center. When we are honest that we cannot fix ourselves, then it comes to the conclusion of one of two things. Either we are incapable of ever being fixed, or something greater than us has to fix us. And what Paul is saying here, this is why Jesus is to be celebrated, because he is actually greater than us. He proved it by defeating death. And he is God. So that means he can reconcile us, and he proved that he's capable of it, and he does it. And so in this, Paul is saying, look, what he does is he covers your sin with his blood, which sounds so weird and creepy. And I tell you this all the time. Our little girl, Sophie, she's 5. And the way that we got her was the craziest supernatural story. But the way that it ended was us sneaking into a judge's chambers a few minutes before court started so we didn't have to deal with all the rigmarole of the day. And we walked across, the judge picked up our package, looked through our home study, looked at us, looked at the package, looked at us and goes, you're going to do this. This is your daughter forever. And we thought it was going to be this long thing. We saw the parenthood scene where everybody cries, and we thought we were going to get all that kind of stuff. And then we go, yeah, here she is. We got her. And he goes, okay, good. Signed a piece of paperwork, stood across, and that was it. No drawn out emotion, no big pageantry. Literally, some blue ink from some man voted as a probate court judge in Summerville, Georgia. Just a little bit of ink made Sophie our daughter. And no one can take that away. No one can. No one can come get her. Her birth parents can't do it. She is ours, and there's some blue ink on a piece of paper that confirmed that. And none of you argue that. And what Paul is saying here is the way that you were brought into his family, the way that you were adopted wasn't blue ink. It was red, and it was blood, and it covers everything. So if we can understand adoption, which is God's heart, then we got to understand how we get adopted too. Something greater than the judges, something greater than things. And so literally what Paul's saying is he literally signs his name on your heart with his blood and goes, nope, my child, nope, you can't have him, you can't have her. God, you can't punish her. You can't send her to the pits of hell. You can't. She's ours. She is bought with our blood. And so he's going, he fixes all things. He reconciles all things. There is nothing you could ever do to separate yourself from that bought blood from him for you and your heart. So we go, we get it with adoption. Jesus, Paul's going, it's so much greater than that. Without blemish and free of accusation, because he made you for him. For him. He paid all the price and he brought you back in for him. Because he wants to cherish you. I'll tell you, at least once a day, Sophie, she's 5 and she's so tiny. She's such a tiny little 5-year-old. And she likes to get in a little ball and she'll just climb up on top of me and she has this little grunt. She's like, and she'll just like roll around and I'll poke her on either side on the head. And she'll go, and I'll just hold her. It's so weird. I know. Sorry for all those grunts. And I'll just hold her and I tell Julie, we laugh and we just are amazed by going, God, I cannot believe this is our daughter. Like, I love them all, but just to cherish that and go, that was some ink. And Jesus, with his blood, just wants you to crawl up in his lap, and he just wants to hold you, and you want that. You want that. So I know about you. You want that. We want that. You know what Paul's going is, he's not a means to an end. That's the end. You get him for all eternity, and this is what he says, and this is number 10, and here's the really good news. It's available to everyone. He's available to everyone. If you continue in your faith, establish them firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard, and that has been proclaimed. Look at this. To every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. So he's going, look. This good news about who Jesus is. This isn't for the rich. This isn't for the white people. This isn't for the ones who behaved. This isn't for just the males. Like, this is for every creature. This news is for everyone, meaning Jesus died and covered you with his blood to welcome you into eternity. That soul part of you that you know you want that. And it's not just for some people, it's for everyone. Which means, if you can hear this, right this second, that's what's available to you. Not that Jesus will fix your marriage. Not that Jesus will give you the money you need. Not that he'll restore all your bad decisions. But much greater than that, he'll give you himself. And you get that for all eternity. And Paul goes, that's the greatest of the news. So what's going to happen is the band's going to come up here, and we're going to sing about this Jesus and what he did. And some of you, you're ready to sing to this guy because he is the one you just want to crawl up and just be held by him. And some of you are going, I'm just not sure. And let's go just for a second. Would you pause and just consider that maybe this is true and that it's available to you? And so I'm going to pray for us. We're going to sing. And here's the words we're going to say in just a second. He is worth trusting. This we know. We will see the enemy run. This we know. We will see the victory come. We hold on to every promise you've ever made. And here's why. Because Jesus, you are unfailing. So Jesus, just confess, Lord, I feel really inadequate to talk about how great you are. Like, you are good, and you are gracious, and you are loving, and you are kind, and oh, God, I want to believe that always. I just want to be able to just rest in that knowledge and knowing. Jesus, you are uniquely different in that you are God. You stepped on this planet, and you did all the work, and we get all the reward. But interesting, God, even as I say that, it's like you're telling me, no, Josh, you don't get all the reward because I get you. So, God, we both get all the reward. Like, we get you, and you get us. Which is all you've ever wanted, God. All you've ever wanted is us. All you've ever wanted is every single man, woman, and child in this room. That's all you've ever wanted. So, God, would we receive that and find joy in knowing that we get you and you get us, and that's glorious. And we pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Would you stand with us as we conclude?